Hello everyone. Today I'm going to share a simple tip regarding Laravel async job. I think we all know what a async job is. If we go to the queues documentation in Laravel, we can see that how we can create a job. If we push this job to the queue and process it later, then it's called an async job or asynchronous job. Also, people know it as queued job. So let's jump to the idea we are going to talk about. Here we have a simple example where in our controller we have a method named create report. In this method, we are just dispatching a job where we will create a sales report, and here is our job. This is a very simplified example to share the idea I'm going to talk about. So we have a class to generate the report, which is a file link, and using this model we are going to store this data in database under this job. Can you spot what's the issue in this code? Okay, let me share. Here we are trying to access the authenticated user and also the request through this request helper. But the problem is when this job is going to processed by the queue or queue worker, these data won't be available there because it's not in the simple request response lifecycle of Laravel. Let me explain it with a simple visualization. Generally, user uses a browser to send a request to the server where our Laravel application is running, and the server sends a response to the user. And when necessary, the server communicates with the database, or our Laravel application communicates with the database to store data or fetch data. This is a very simplified request response lifecycle for a Laravel application. But in some cases, we need to process some data which might take time. So we don't process it in the same request response lifecycle. So the user doesn't need to wait for a long time and it doesn't give them a bad user experience. So in that case, what we do, we store the job or the task in a queue and process it later by the worker. And this happens under a separate lifecycle, not the same request response lifecycle created by the user. So in the basic or primary request response lifecycle, the session data or request data is available and we can access them using the session helper or request helper, or authenticated user data is available because that's part of the session. But when the asynchronous job is being processed by the worker, there is no session data or request data available. So we cannot just call the session helper or request helper or auth user helper to access those data. As a Laravel developer, you should have a clear idea about this mental model, how Laravel handles the general request response and how it processes the asynchronous jobs. I think now it's clear to you why we should not write code like this in our jobs. But here is one important fact to remember. Even if you write code like this by mistake, it will work on your local machine, but it won't work on production. But why it will work on your local machine? Because most of the time when we work on our local machine for development, we keep the queue connection as sync. So no matter what we implement should queue here, this job will be processed synchronously. So in that case, this data will be available here, but as soon as you deploy this code to the production, it won't work because most of the time we use asynchronous queue connection in our production. So that's why we should keep in mind that we should not use these helpers here. We should not access session data, auth user, like helpers like this, or it doesn't matter whether it's a helper or the facade, because those are like same. So if you need to access these data, what you should do, you should pass them to the constructor. I think you already know it. So you should pass the user here, you should pass the request data here, and then you can access them like this, right? So that's the idea, and I think it's a very important idea to remember when we are working on asynchronous jobs. There are a lot of things which is different in asynchronous jobs than our regular CRUD operations. So when you are writing a asynchronous job class or processing asynchronous jobs, make sure that you understand the overall workflow so that you can work more confidently and can avoid working on my local machine but not in production kind of scenario.